Started. Good evening. How we doing? Is anybody thinking about that Blackhawks game that starts at 8:30? I think we all are. Okay. So we can get started on time, and we'll get you out of here to get there. So good evening. My name is Doug Farr. I'm head of Farr Associates. We've been hired by the Village of Tinley Park to lead the master planning process for the Mental Health Center. I've seen many of your familiar faces in the past, so thank you for coming tonight. So tonight is called the Educational Forum, and this meeting was added to the project to do a couple things. One is, if you remember a couple of meetings ago, there was a lot of interest in, amongst other things, sports fields. People came out and said, we really want to fill the site with sports fields. And there was a lot of sort of curiosity about what the market might support. So we hadn't planned on devoting a full evening to it, but it made a lot of sense to add this. So this educational section is going to include a really strong bit on the market analysis and kind of what there's support for. So it will be a lot of information. We'll go pretty fast. We're going to have a question and answer session partway through. So introductions, we're going to update this, show you the schedule again, recap the last workshop where we did those votes, the keypad votes, if you remember those. They're pretty fun. And the results are interesting. The market analysis, Jeff Dickinson from Steve Friedman's shop will do about half hour of sharing what the market findings are. We're going to have a full 20 minutes then for Q&A. We're going to hand out cards if people have questions, because there's a lot of technical detail Jeff's going to provide, so I'm sure you'll have questions. Got a full 20 minutes to do that, and then we want to do an exercise with you where you plan the site. Basically, you take all the uses you're going to hear there's interest in, and you put it out on the site. So you get to be a town planner tonight. And then hopefully we get this all done quickly, and then we're at home watching the game with our feet up, something like that. So our consultant team I've introduced a number of times. There's 6 firms devoted to master planning, market analysis, transportation, landscape, hydrology and water, and then finally infrastructure. You'll hear specifically from Jeff Dickinson. Also his colleague Caitlin Amos is here, wherever she is in the back. Probably she did a lot of the work. So thank you, Caitlin, and thank you, Jeff. So the project schedule, as I said, we've added a couple of meetings. One is this educational forum, and then it's shifted the schedule back. So after tonight, we will see you, unless you are a youth or a school kid, we will next see you on June 1st or June 4th. We're going to come back with 3 master plan schemes. We're going to show them twice to make sure that we see the most people. So we're going to do it during the week and then again on Saturday. And then if all goes well, we wrap up and present the final preferred master plan in the middle of July 13th. And as I said, we're going to engage youth. I think those of you who came to the last meeting, we did the keypad polling and saw the age of the folks who came out. As an AARP member, I'm proud of it. On the flip side, we aren't hearing from the kids. And in some ways, master plans, because they take so long, are always for the kids. So we're going to make an extra effort there on that same June 4th Saturday. So it's pretty exciting. So June 4th, this is here, right? Central Middle School. Is there a C in front of me? That's for Central, I think. So it's not Cubs, right? It's for Central. Or is it for Central? Yeah, hope so. So here's the workshop 2, the workshop we did back in March. You may recognize yourself here. And if you're sitting in the same seat, you are a creature of habit, right? So maybe you've moved around a little bit. If you remember, we had, as people came in, we asked people to put dots and prioritize the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats that we had solicited the first time. So I have the results from that. So first is the list of strengths. So these are the number in the circle is the number of people who put dots next to that topic. So greatest votes, great community, amenities and activities, strong economic development, proximity to and access to transportation and open space were the 4 top-ranked strengths. Greatest weaknesses, an imbalance between taxes and property values, lack of government transparency, high commercial property taxes. So arguably the first and third ones here are talking about some of the same stuff. And then 4th, inconsistent building codes and zoning. Greatest opportunities, having revenue generating uses on the site, retail, storefronts, dining, and other uses. greatest opportunity village to control the development. I think that's a common theme. And then open space network with amenities. And then finally, greatest threats. So the cost of the repurchase and the cost of cleaning up the toxics and remediation on the site. Second greatest threat, the tax structure. We'll talk about that. Jeff will educate us on that. Third, increased demand and impact on resources. I assume that's sort of municipal financial resources. And then finally, public-private partnerships as a threat. So hopefully that makes sense. It's a snapshot into what you all are thinking. Now, we did this exercise the last time in person. We had 149 people with the little clicker remotes, and then we have had, as of this morning, we had 209 online responses. As of tonight, we just checked 15 minutes ago, it's up to 219. So another 10 people or so voted today. So if you haven't voted, we encourage you to do so, and don't worry, you can't vote twice, assuming you don't have multiple email addresses. So we should have a pretty honest response. So from these are the results of the in-person voting that we did the last time. This is the age tally by percentage. Let's see, there we go. So you can see under 18, 2%, and so on, a big block of folks in the 50 to 65%, and then over 65. You could say over 50%, if over 50 years old was almost 75% of the audience. So we really do want to work hard, not to hear from that group, but also to hear from the rest of the folk. I think the average age of a Tinley Park resident is 37 or 38, something like that. So we're hitting on the older end, so we're going to work to balance that. So we had asked the question about how much of the site should be covered with a sportsplex. I think there's consensus that there need to be some sports fields and ball fields, whether they are for simply the neighbors that will live there in the future and existing neighbors, or whether it becomes a dominant land use and a different kind of sportsplex. So this is a question we asked: how many acres, how much of the site should be dedicated to recreational fields? You can see 41% of the results, respondents said 5% of the site, which would be about 10 acres, something like that. 33% said 20%, which would be about, 40 acres, something like that. And then you can see sort of less on the two ends. So anyway, there's a desire for some. The online voting I can share with you. I know that the percentage of people that favored more of the site to be sportsplex went up in the online voting, but we haven't tallied that yet because we're waiting for it to kind of finish. So next question we asked, is this a desired character for the metro station area? And this is a question, if you remember, we allowed people to vote for more than one, sort of vote for all that you liked. So this one, if you remember, we had a glitch last time and the computer shut down, blah, blah, blah. So this is the actual online results. But so 57% liked the 3 to 4 story, 40% liked the 4 to 5 story, and 13% liked the, what is that, sort of 7 to 8 story. Because this was the online vote, we believe only about 10% of the folks voted twice. Either you are very honest people and have a discomfort with voting twice. Nobody apparently grew up in Chicago, so we appreciate you only vote once, so you're a good people. But it could be just that people didn't, when they took the online version, this is one of the few questions where we allowed people to vote more than once. So I would not take a 40% as disapproval, because frankly, mostly people voted for one favored one. So there was, as I said, not too many double votes. So I would say the left one or the middle one were receiving pretty high approval. The one on the right was not. Are these desired housing types for the metro station area? Townhouses, as you can see on the left, yes. Mixed use of some height on the right, yes. And apartments, I think because of fear of who might live in them, got a low vote, so less so. Obviously the form between the middle one and the right one are frankly not that different. We understand what the concern there is. Are these desired housing types for the neighborhood? So that was a question about the station area. This is now about the rest of the site. Single-family homes and townhomes, beloved, those are very high numbers. And frankly, the rest of them are all pretty comparable. Apartments, duplexes, what we call the 6-unit building, 6 flat, all about the same. So there's 2 really beloved, and then 3 kind of traveling together in the multifamily realm. Excuse me. Then we asked about commercial types. Are these appropriate for the state campus site? So 1 and 2 story in the middle was well liked. The one on the upper right, again, well liked. Live work was, more than half. That was interesting, because sometimes you ask people if they like something that doesn't exist in their town and it's weird and nobody knows what it is, but people liked it. So that's live work is just the idea that you live typically above the shop. Lower left, medium mixed use, medium height mixed use, generally approved, a little below half, and then when it got really tall, people stopped liking it. So the next one, are these office buildings appropriate for the state campus site? The lower rise stuff, yes. Somewhat taller, less so, and then really tall, no. So let's see, next one. Can you still visit the website to take the visual preference survey? Yes, you can. And if you don't have a business card to find the website, raise your hand and one will be walked to you right now, or you can get one on the way out. There's a young woman up here in front if someone could get her a card. You know who you are. The website, if you haven't been to it, has all the information. We are really committed to transparency. Everything we do appears here. Our contracts, all the agreements and correspondence between the village and the state are all there. So all your questions can be answered there. If you have a navigational problem, Grant is the website administrator. Just send him an email and he'll help you find it. So the planning process considerations. I just like to state these because I think they're important to frame people's conversations, because you can't repeat the messages too many times. So number one, a lot of people ask, is this a plan to buy the property? No. This is, I think what I've learned from the trustees is that it's in the village interest to control what happens there, right? How that's done is a decision down the road. Purchasing it certainly does it. There may be other ways to do that. But the messages were about controlling what happens there. We don't want it to fall into the wrong hands, for bad things to happen there, and so on. So control. Number two is part of our work is also figuring out what tools there are to best control it. If particularly in the scenario where it isn't purchased, what do we put in place, zoning and other controls. And then finally, a consideration that's on our minds a lot, which is this, that a master plan community, think of it as a neighborhood where everything is just where you want it. If it's well designed and it's got the right mix of uses and the right configuration, will earn a premium. The houses and shops and so on will sell for more and rent for more than an unplanned place. So, and then this is one where I'm adult enough to now want to just say these things. One of the things that we've talked to a number of developers last year and this year, and this is just so you've heard this, developers in the world, when they buy a site, do not want to, not surprisingly, do not want to take over someone else's toxic mess. I mean, if you were buying a property, would you want to take it over? No, you'd want the seller to clean it up before you bought it. So that's just a fact. So just put that in your minds, and we'll come back to that. Without further ado, Jeff Dickinson. So Jeff will go for about 30 minutes, and if you have questions as he's going, raise your hand, and somebody will walk a card out to you, and you can write down a question. So what does a market study do? It makes short-term projections the next few years to implement a long-term plan. It will provide breakdowns of how much of each thing is desired, and then how much to kind of year by year for the first few years. What does it not do? It does not predict what that premium is of the master plan, perfect placement. The park is just the right distance, the restaurant's just where I want it, all those kinds of things not in this market study. And as I said, if you have a question, raise your hand, we'll get you a card, you write it down, and then we'll answer them all right at the back. So with that, Jeff.
Great. Thanks, Doug. Hi, glad to be here, glad to talk about the market. I guess a little more, just to add something to what Doug was saying, part of why do you do a market analysis as a part of a master planning exercise? I think the fundamental reason for us is we want master plans to be aspirational, optimistic, progressive, creative, but they do function in the real estate market, and so we have to understand what those markets are in order to know how to push those edges and create this best case place that we've been hearing about in these community meetings, Doug's talking about, and we're talking about. So this is sort of foundation information, we think, to make a responsible, creative plan. And so that's what we're trying to do here as a part of the team. When you're doing any sort of market analysis, there are a few things you need to think about. This list sort of summarizes the key considerations before you can start making recommendations or projections of what's going to be feasible. As Doug mentioned, there is a lot of detail here. This obviously will be provided on the website, so, and we're happy to answer questions at the end, and we're happy to talk after. So any way we can get you the information you need, but I'm going to move through it with reasonable pace in order to try to keep the evening moving. So the first question we ask when we conduct a market analysis is, what are the physical conditions of the site now, and what are they going to be in the future, or what should we assume they're going to be in the future? So this is a quick map of the site. We think about adjacencies. That's always important to what's going to be feasible. What does the private development world want to build on a site? Again, I think you all know this. You know the train station is there. You know the convention center is there. You know downtown's not far, and that there's commercial and industrial land uses on either side. You also know, as Doug mentioned, there are obsolete buildings and infrastructure and environmental issues. So those are not site assets, but they're there. So one of the things we did at the beginning of this analysis, and we had to do, I think, was assume, as Doug said, a clean, buildable site. We got to assume if that's not done, we don't have a market really. Secondly, we've assumed that there's going to be a high quality, well-designed, highly amenitized environment. Again, Doug mentioned that. This is the kind of special place that we've been talking about throughout the process. So these recommendations are based on the assumption that that is the kind of world that we're trying to get development in. And more tactically and smaller issue, we need another traffic signal in Harlem at some point to make the retail work. So that's a very minor issue, but I didn't want to leave it out because it is relevant, I think, particularly to retail. So as we think about the physical conditions, the next thing you need to think about is the demographic environment. You can do different things at different income levels. That is to say, the development community wants to do different things at different income levels. From a housing perspective, these are the communities we think that the site's going to compete with. We're going to obviously compete with other options in Tinley Park. People like living in Tinley Park. They might want to live at this site. They might want to live somewhere else. But more broadly, there are other places nearby that are also nice places. No, I'm not trying to, they're not nicer. They're just different. And people make that choice. So I want to make that point. Not every consumer has a huge preference to live in Tinley. They think about different things when they make a housing choice. So these are the towns we think are where, if I'm moving down to the neighborhood, what are the towns I want to look at? And that's who we're competing with. Again, as I mentioned, we're going to compete in our own way, in our own environment, but there are alternatives not that far away. Doug mentioned concerns in the survey from you all about property taxes, and so I want to talk a little bit about how property taxes impact development, particularly at the site. It's a very important issue, so I want to spend just a minute on that. It's not the most interesting thing in the world, but it is, I think, germane. So again, the blue in the map there is our site. The orange line, which again you all may know this, that goes east-west just on the south edge of the site and then goes due south on Harlem, that's the Cook-Will County line, and we're in Cook County with this site. That is a very important issue. The table to the left outlines how you get to a tax bill mechanically. What is the mathematical process to get there? The most important number perhaps in that is the number 2 there, assessment level. In Cook County, a house is assessed at 10% of market value. And in Will County, it's at 33%. Those mostly cook out, and I'll show you on the next slide how they're more or less the same for residential, the taxes are. The difference is, in Cook County, the assessment level for commercial properties, that is retail, office, hotel, industrial, is much higher. It's 25%. And so that classification-based assessment that we have in Cook County leads to higher taxes in Cook County. And again, I don't want to overmake the point, but this is the math of it, just to give you an illustration. On the left, you've got a hypothetical tax bill for a $13 million commercial building. So this is a big box store like a Target or a Walmart, for example. In Will County, taxes on that building would be about $440,000 a year. The very same building across the street on our site would be over $1 million a year, so 2.5 times higher. This is a fundamental fact, an unfortunate fact of Cook County assessment, but that is a reason why it's not just this site, but all of the commercial properties in Cook County in the village are harder to develop. So I just want to lay that out as a foundational piece of information for those of you who didn't know that. As I say, the yellow bars I mentioned earlier, property taxes are more or less equal, a little favorable in Cook County, in fact, relative to Will. So we see that as a slight competitive advantage for the site from a housing perspective, but it's a challenge for the other land uses given this assessment environment and the difference and the fact that we're right literally on the line with the property. All hope is not lost. There are various tools to try to address that disparity. Cook County has special assessment classifications that can help lower the taxes on a commercial property. This is in a TIF district, the site, so that's a source of funds. You can use property tax abatements and historic tax credits. So there are various levers you can push and pull, and we intend to push and pull on those as a part of this process to make sure we get to some feasible real estate economics. But that said, the challenge is real, and it has to be addressed one way or another frequently to get commercial deals to work in Cook County. So I just wanted to lay that out as a challenge that we're going to struggle with to make sure we get the best thing we can get. In addition to taxes, or beyond taxes, I guess we want to step now into sort of more of a product-based analysis. So the way this is organized is by different types of real estate. And we're just going to step through, again, in a summary fashion, the analysis. What did we look at? What were the big takeaways, and what are the conclusions in terms of what is feasible? All these answers are put in rough time frames for now. We're going to refine these analyses as we refine the master plans down to a more detailed environment, but we wanted to present at a high level what's got most likelihood in the near term. It's obviously a very big site, Doug's mentioned a couple times. Phasing is a huge part of this planning process. We've got to have early phases that make sense, that can be developed, because if we're looking 20, 25 years out to finish the site, you know, what's the 5 to 10 year phase? That's the first real issue. We needed to work with the 25-year phase, but that's an important part of it. So the first thing we look at in housing is single-family detached homes. This is a regular house, if you will. That's, you know, and you all know this as well or better than I do. Most housing in Tinley Park, single-family housing, is a conventional suburban house, not just Tinley Park, but most of the Chicago suburbs. It's got a similar design. It's got a similar location. Often your garage access is right off the street because there aren't any alleys in Tinley Park. That's the way that housing, the housing world is today in Tinley. And again, in all those competitive towns I mentioned. I think the key point I wanted to make here is those are the existing conditions, and we have to be aware of those. You know, how many bedrooms does a house have? How big are the households in Tinley Park? Based on the information we've looked at, they're a little bigger than, you know, you've got lots of kids in Tinley Park. That makes sense. It's a nice place to raise a family. So there are more 3 and 4 bedroom houses here. So we need to accept that and acknowledge that, and then push that in the planning process. What other products can we get to get different sorts of people or different sorts of housing options? So again, that's the evolution of this homework that's going to come. I guess the other point we want to make with this analysis is we did look at the difference between Tinley Park as a village and the portion of Tinley Park that this site is in, that is to say, within the high school district. The number I should have off the top of my head, 230. Pricing is higher here. And again, I think you all know this if you live here. We've got the math to support that. This is for 4-bedroom houses. But people pay more to live in this part of Tinley Park than others. But people pay yet more for a similar house per square foot. If you look at the chart, it's about $120 a foot here, 150 in Orland, give or take, and 135 in Frankfurt. So those are some ceilings we start to think about. What can we shoot for? And some opportunities to raise the pitch for single-family housing. But the summary is single-family housing is going to work here. It's always worked in Tinley, and it will for a long, long time. We just got to work on the details. Attached for-sale houses. So this is townhomes or condos. We did a similar analysis. Smaller premium for a townhome in this school district relative to the rest of the village. But again, slightly higher pricing in some of the surrounding environments. Not a lot higher, actually. It's not as big a differential. So townhomes aren't as flexible, perhaps, and the pricing doesn't move as much as you go into other towns that generally get higher prices. But the standard product here is about a 2-bedroom townhouse. You move up from a townhouse usually to a single-family house. That's the normal progression. But again, this is a product that has worked, that will work, and will play an important role, I think, in the master plan as we go forward. More nuanced, I guess, is the luxury rental apartment question. There hadn't been any of this in the south suburbs until very, very recently. Orland Park, the village, helped use public financial dollars to support 9750, for those of you who know it, right at the train station there, the metro stop. It's a pretty big project, 300 units almost. The rents are in the 170, 180 is what they're going to stabilize per foot. So that means for an apartment, you're going to pay $1,300 to $2,300 a month to rent it. This is not a cheap place to live. You know, you need to make $50,000 to almost $100,000 a year to be able to afford to rent one of these apartments if you're spending 30% of your income on rent. So this is the kind of product that we think would be appropriate for the site potentially. Might have a little retail in it, as the one in Orland does. That one is currently vacant, that piece. But it's a nice amenity to the building and to the environment if it can get filled up. But we do think that it will need financial assistance if the village wants to do one like this in the first phase in Tinley Park. The interesting point to make, though, is the second project like this in Orland didn't need village assistance. So they proved the market with Project A. Project B came forward and is just getting done privately by the development community without any help. So that's, I think, a positive story about spurring a market with some assistance financially. So in conclusion on housing, as I said, detached single-family houses and townhome houses ownership are going to work. They are going to get a higher price point than you would expect in the rest of the village. There may be additional premiums from the environment that we create. We haven't, as Doug said, we haven't put a number to that, but there is certainly a quality factor that people are going to be willing to pay for and an environment factor they're going to want to pay for. Rental apartments are going to need to be big, at least the first one. Those need to be a large project, 150 units, in order to have the on-site amenities that people need to want to live there, the clubhouse, the fitness center, a pool. You just need a big project to support that. Out further, you're going to continue to do for sale housing, maybe more rental apartments, maybe in smaller format as the environment matures and you get more things to do in the neighborhood. And maybe condos one day. That's not working anywhere right now, really, in the suburbs, except in the really, really most high amenity downtowns like an Elmhurst or an Evanston. But again, that may come back. That was a hot product at one point. We are going to look into other sort of more fine-grained for sale and for rent products like duplexes, and Doug showed some pictures of those. But we don't have specific findings, just that there is going to be market for housing in various formats, we think, in the master plan and over the next couple of decades. So that's housing. The next question becomes retail. What is the potential for retail? I'm going to step a little bit through the structure of the retail environment because I think it's informative as to what can work. Again, you guys know this. There are malls in Chicago Ridge and Orland, and there used to be one in Matheson, and there's still a big retail cluster there. The way retail acts, it wants to be, the big stuff wants to be together. It wants to create a big trip, so you just get in the car, you go to Orland, and you can drive up and down that stretch and do all your shopping on a Saturday, get everything you need. That's how retail likes to behave, the big boxes and the biggest agglomerations. So those are their own things, and they need to be a certain distance apart. These ones are conveniently roughly equidistant apart, so they can't be, they need a bigger market area. In between those, though, you see what we call power centers. So those are they're like Brookside Marketplace. Still a lot of shopping, but not the full suite of options. And again, we're not in that environment either, so we're stepping down. We're not the big mall cluster. We're not the power center cluster at this site. We've got to find a niche that fits inside of that, and you can continue to step down, and as you'll see, the pattern gets finer and finer grained as you get into the smaller products. So this is just a rough structure of how the retail world works, and we're inside of the power center environment, so a smaller scale than that. This is that smaller scale. I think the big takeaway on this map is, one, the convention center is creating some anomalous behavior because we're getting nice new retail environment development over there. You see the darker red dots are the older buildings on the map. And there has been some new older buildings in the Cook County side right around the convention center. That's a special place, that's a destination. It's going to be attractive to retailers. But the big numbers are down again at Brookside Marketplace. That's where a lot in the village, again, primarily because of the tax issue identified earlier. So that's something we can't ignore, and we do need to think about where we fit into this broader pattern. So once you step into that pattern, you realize you're going to be a mid-sized retail environment. The things that tend to make those go are grocery stores and drugstores. So this is the grocery store pattern. Again, you all shop in the stores. You know where they are, but we need to lay it out so we can understand it. There's a big grocery environment along 159th Street. There is also a pretty decent grocery presence up and down Harlem, both north and south of the site. So that, right now, we don't believe leaves a lot of opportunity for a grocery store at the site. Nobody lives there yet. And so given that there's such a large number of grocers close to the site, the near-term we don't have a lot of near-term optimism for grocery stores, just from a market perspective, not even to consider the tax issue. Pharmacy, drugstore, we're more optimistic about. You can see they occur more frequently. They need a smaller yet market area. So you step down again, they can go every few blocks or every half mile rather than more infrequently. And so that we're more optimistic about. It's a smaller store, it needs a smaller market area, but again, it needs people. And so that's the real, I think, constraint to seeing a pharmacy type use work on this site. We need more residential development to drive that and make that more feasible. So in conclusion, on the retail side, the housing is important. The old retail guys say retail follows rooftops. We don't have a lot of rooftops. We don't have hardly any rooftops on the site right now. So we need housing absorption to make the retail work. A point that I think is worth making is that metro stops alone don't drive a lot of retail. Again, those of you who commute by train know you maybe grab something, you maybe drop off a piece of dry cleaning, whatever it is, but it's a very quick transaction. You don't spend a lot of money on your commute going or coming home. So that alone isn't enough really to drive a lot of retail. Another consideration that we want to mention at least is that retail, as I said earlier, has options to go elsewhere, and so we have to think about the alternate sites. One of those sites might be in the downtown, so we have to balance that. That is, we being the board, it's not our decision where you want to prioritize retail environments, but the downtown's got a nice environment, and maybe you want to build that. There's only so much retail you can get, so we've got to weigh that as we go through the planning process, and how much retail do we need on this site versus other places in the village. The taxes are a challenge, that's just a fact. So what we see in the near to midterm is small-scale retail. This would be, again, like a dry cleaners, a nail place, a hair place, a pizza place, something like that around the train station. There's a little bit of that there now. You could probably do more once there's some housing in place. And as the housing fills in, a drugstore, and ultimately, hopefully, a grocer would come, and that, again, can support more go-along retail. So we get the train station going early, hopefully, and then maybe the Harlem frontage gets some retail downstream when the housing numbers go up and the population and the income and all that goes up. So what is the potential for office now? And I do apologize, I know I'm going fast, but we got a lot of ground to cover. Office, again, this is sort of the typology discussion. Office, in our analysis, there are really two kinds of big office. There's corporate office, and there's non-corporate office or medical office. The corporate offices are the big boxes. The medical office sort of behaves a little bit more like retail. It needs to be near its customers. And so, as you'll see, that they've got different site location preferences and different feasibilities, we think, at the site. Just as by way of information, this is the map of where Class A corporate office in Chicagoland goes. It goes to the Loop. It goes to the east-west corridor on I-88, Downers Grove and over there. It goes around O'Hare. It goes in the northern suburbs and the northwest suburbs. If you look down by Tinley Park, Panduit is the only box that we've really got that qualifies by our estimates and data as Class A office. So that is, we're just not in the pattern. And the reason for that is we're not in the middle of the labor pool, I think, largely. You know, if you want to get employees and your offices are in Tinley Park, you're not going to get a lot of people who are willing to work here and live in Glenview. But if you're in the Loop or, you know, preferably, or Downers Grove or something like that, you can capture people from north and south. So we're structurally challenged to get big corporate office in all the south suburbs, Tinley among them. So that's a fundamental challenge. Here's the zoomed-in illustration of where development has been occurring for office of any sort. As you'll see, again, the numbers, the dark numbers, the dark dots are the newer buildings, and they almost all are in Will County. So again, this illustrates the tax challenge. There is one exception. If you look over to the west at LaGrange Road, there is the Advocate Building that's relatively new, and they are paying Cook County taxes. So that is the example that gives us, I think, reason to believe there may be medical office potential at some point, again, with enough population. They needed to be there, they needed to be near their customers, and they were willing to pay the higher taxes to do it. But broadly speaking, the office environment and the office market probably doesn't want to be in Cook County if they can help it, and they've shown that pretty clearly with their site selection behavior here. So in conclusion, on office, as I said, corporate office is not likely to be here. We can't rule that out. You know, if there's a particular user who is from Tinley Park, he or she is a CEO of a corporation, they want to put their office here, by gosh, they're going to do it, and that's great. I would think they're going to try to put it in Will County if they can, to be honest, but if they can't, maybe they'll come to the site. So there's always a wild card. You know, people do things for reasons that are not consistent with the normal behavior, and we acknowledge that, but I wouldn't expect it, and I certainly can't tell you it's going to happen in 2, 3, 4, or 5 years that would happen. The medical office, again, just needs more housing. I think that Advocate Building is new. For it to serve fully the population and then require more real estate, it's going to take more people. So that's going to lag to the extent that that becomes feasible. It's going to be downstream. Hotels, this was another question that came up, I think, as a part of some of the earlier process. What is the market potential for a hotel at the site? So again, we look at the competitive environment to think about what's out there. This map excludes what the analysts call budget motels, so the really inexpensive ones with the low rates and then maybe not the nicest quality. We don't really think about those because we're not expecting a new user to compete or consider that as an option. So this is a subset of the total universe, but it's the newer, nicer stuff is what's in our map. And again, you all know this. There's a cluster of hotels down in Matheson. We've got a cluster at the convention center and around it. There's some over at LaGrange Road. So there is a hotel environment that we're in, and our site is adjacent to, and it is a pretty successful one. In fact, the vectors are all positive in terms of rents and so forth. The challenge here, I think, for hotel is it becomes, again, there's a tax issue. We've talked about that now. I've talked about it 100 times, so I won't beat that any further. But you start thinking about where else would you go if you were a hotel developer. If I can get a site at LaGrange Road in Will County, why wouldn't I do that? The only real exception to that is the hotel next to the Convention Visitor Bureau, the Holiday Inn that's adjacent, is doing well and might be able to support another one. So one that is actually touching the convention center might work. with some financial help to fix the taxes. But if you're thinking about one that's detached from that, the likelihood of it coming to our side, I think, is relatively low, because they can just go to Will County and capture much of the same market, at least in the near term. We do think if the village thinks a convention center hotel is important, that would probably limit or even further our potential to get one at our site, because you're unlikely to get two very soon. The market's not that strong and that rapidly growing. The scale of those things, the newer product of the limited service hotels are 100 and 120 rooms. But again, I think I'd want to be next to or touching the convention center or in Will County if I was a hotel investor and developer, if I could figure it out. What is the market potential for a movie theater? So again, another product that people asked about, so we've stepped through the analysis on. Again, the typologies, there's the big multiplex, 8, 10, 12, now more like 16 screens. And then there's the specialty ones, the one screens, the downtown theater that's owned by a nonprofit and operated by volunteers. Those specialty ones behave uniquely, shall we say. That's a big function of community involvement and public money and all sorts of stuff to make those work usually. But the multiplexes are the ones that we're able to more effectively analyze, I think. Again, specialty theaters happen and are successful, but they do need special care and feeding and engagement to make them go. So to assess the feasibility of the site for a movie theater complex, we looked at Regal Entertainment. This is not everybody, this is what they need. They need a population of about 120,000 people within 5 miles. We've got substantially more than that around the site. They need incomes of at least 50,000. We've got income substantially in excess of that, so those are very positive. The challenge we have is they also want to be in a retail environment. They want co-tenancy, they call it. So they want to be part of a big, and if you think of ones they often have a lot of other stuff around them. 300,000 square feet or more of retail that they want to be a part of, that whole thing. And we don't have that, and we don't think we will have that on the site. So that's a real challenge. And they want scale. They want 12 to 18 screens. And as you'll see in our analysis, we think the market potential may only be for 6 to 10 in the near term. So there's a couple of challenges here that make, I think, the feasibility of a theater of this size limited in the near term. This is the map of the competition. Just this morning, or no, yesterday morning, I guess, we added in the Country Club Hills Theater. I think if you all saw, that's been acquired and it's going to come back to life. That news just came out yesterday, but we've got that in here, and we've assumed that's going to come back to life. There's also a proposed theater down in the old Dominic's in Frankfurt, and we've looked at that with the market environment with and without that one. We don't know if that's going to go or not. So, but otherwise, these are the cinemas around our site in the blue there. So the way we analyze this is we look at what are the populations, assuming that you would make a choice to go to the movies based solely on distance from your house. It's a simplified analysis, we know that, but it's a decent way to get a quick sense of how much opportunity there is to make a theater work. So our site is obviously in the middle there with the red dot, and the blue field is the area that we would capture, the market area that we could capture from. Based on this is assuming both the Country Club Hills and the Frankfurt Theater come in. We think we could get about 6 screens. That's really not enough to do a multiplex. And without the Frankfurt, it's 10. It's still short. It's better, obviously, but not enough. So again, I think the point is there is opportunity here for theaters, but there probably isn't enough to make it be the thing that is the thing in the market, this big 12, 16 screen Cineplex. More fundamentally, as I said, the lack of adjacencies is probably what's going to be the disqualifier for a cinema operator, that and the taxes. So it's a really tough environment, I think, for a movie theater at our site for all those reasons that I just outlined. Again, out in the distance, things change. Again, movie theater behavior changes, consumer behavior changes, so you never know. But in the near to middle term, we're not optimistic, I think, about a big theater idea here. Sportsplex. This is one of the other big issues, as Doug mentioned, that came up. And what is the potential for a sportsplex? So we looked into that as well. The way we did this is we looked at a bunch of them. We looked at probably 8 or 10 in the Chicagoland region to try to understand what are they, how big are they, and more. So they're somewhere between 70 and 320 acres in the sample set that we looked at, the case studies. Call it 150 acres on average. They've got lots of fields. Again, those of you who know this, I'm telling you stuff you know, but a dozen multi-purpose fields. Some have turf, some have grass. They've got an indoor facility, so that's where you can play volleyball tournaments and such, as well as batting cages and other things. So they've got a lot, and they're very large, relatively speaking. They are publicly owned. That's one of the most important findings. The private sector does not own these in our research. So they are park districts, they are villages and cities that own them and operate them. And secondarily, they are not self-supporting, it doesn't appear. So they take in fees from users, but they don't take in enough fees to pay for the cost of operations. So the public sector has to pay to build them, the capital side of the project, and to some extent the public sector, through taxes, has to pay to operate them. So those are the things we want to get out, again, on the table. What are the parameters of the thing, and how does it work? And it works mostly through government ownership and tax, or in part through tax payments. The other things we learned is they can be located near residential neighborhoods. Some of them are right up against neighborhoods. I think for some people they would be considered an amenity, others they would be considered not, but again, people have different preferences. They don't have to be on top of a hotel complex such as we have, or an interchange. We didn't know if that was true. Is it important that a facility like this be in such a location? The answer is no. It can be 5 or 10 or 15 minutes away from the hotel. So they're flexible a little bit in terms of where they go. I think if they had to be at our site, it would be a more compelling argument. And again, to put one here, but they are a little bit flexible in their location. Other things to think about: they can compete with private businesses. If somebody owns a batting cage facility in town privately, and this thing gets built, that might be a concern. And here, as with all other things, there may be another place to put this, especially given that we don't have to put it near the hotels to make it work, and the interstate interchange. On the tax side, they don't pay property taxes because they're government owned, so that's good in that we don't worry about the Cook County issue that I've mentioned. But it doesn't generate any revenue directly to the village beyond the user fees, or the other taxing bodies for that matter. So that's the other side of that coin. Obviously, it does provide benefits to the community, so that's more of the real estate analyst. As a citizen, you say amenities both in the sports facilities, and they often have other things like dog parks and trails that people who don't engage in sports, usually youth sports, care to use. So they're a nice community amenity, no question about it. And they are beneficial to the hotels and the restaurants, and that people come here for a tournament or whatever, they go to dinner, they stay in the hotel, that generates tax revenue. So there are fiscal benefits and community benefits from these facilities. There's no if you wouldn't mind writing it down, and we'll take it at the end. I just want to work through the whole thing, but I'm happy to take it at the end.
I'm sure that everybody understands that the comparable facility here that we actually have in its first year, full year open in 2015 generated $147.7 million in the economy. So they didn't pay the taxes on the business and stayed, but it actually drove nearly $150 million in the local economy, which dramatically reduces the tax rates. So I just want to make sure that we're using.
Well, I guess I don't want to really engage in the conversation, but the real issue for me on this is the taxes to pay to build it and run it are going to be paid by the people at Tinley Park, and those economic benefits are going to accrue to the Southland.
Grant Park in Indiana actually has a model that actually is dual. So none of these actually serve as a proper comparison point. Grant Park in Indiana actually, and we'll just go through the facts here, it generated $57.5 million in building. It had generated 800 jobs in its first year open. It actually had economic activity of $89.8 million during the 3-year build. And then, like we said, in its first month open, 57,000 hotel stays just in its first month open.
All right, great, thanks. Well, we can talk about it at the end. I appreciate it.
It's also subsidized by private and public investment to create a model that drove economic viability of the region.
Okay, well, it may need more study. That's fair enough. But ultimately, from our point of view, this is ultimately a policy decision. Does the village want to do this? If there's another model that can be constructed, that'd be great, but it's not really a market-driven issue. It will take, give or take, 100 acres, and it will take more work, and I think that's the point we're making with our last bullet here. You got to really dig in on this and make sure you understand what you're building and how the money is going to work, because it is not an insubstantial investment. So in summary, this is sort of the cooked-down version of all this talking that I've been doing. Single-family homes we think are going to work now, in the middle term, and the long term. They're not going to need any public assistance. Those get built. Townhomes likewise. Condominiums aren't going to work today or in the near term, but they may come back and probably can get done without help. The luxury apartments are going to need help financially, probably at least the first one, and they can work right now. We've talked to developers about this site and other sites. There's interest, but in downstream, apartments have come and gone as a product that gets built, so you have to kind of keep that in the potential category. Retail, the small-scale retail can happen, but it will need some assistance to straighten out the tax issues. We're less optimistic near-term about grocery, pharmacy, office, hotel, and movie theaters, but they get more potential out in the future. And as I said, the Sportsplex ultimately is a policy call because it's really a publicly driven project usually. There may be an exception, but that's not normally how they go. Those are, I believe, the findings. So I'm happy to field other questions if folks have them. We've got a card, Karishma.
Here we go. So one of the questions was, how about a combination sportsplex golf course or just a golf course?
I mean, those are, again, if it's a publicly owned golf course, I guess I don't know the specifics of the golf environment in the greater Tinley area. I know in other towns that I've worked, communities are troubled that they don't have enough activity on their golf courses, publicly owned golf courses. So someone would have to study that. If the community wants it, obviously, again, that's a thing you got to pay for with taxes, generally speaking, and then some user fees. But that's a policy question, not something I can really tell you what you should do on. Yes, ma'am, in the front.
You were talking about the very large apartment complex in Orland, right near the train station. Has that been a financial success? We have, it's kind of apples to apples.
Yeah.
It's a commuter apartment or commuter condos or whatever, and these would probably be the same thing. Is the occupancy high? Is it going concern? Are they making money? Are they doing well?
It is going well. Occupancy is high, rents are good. The rents are not sufficiently high to pay for the whole project. So that's the nuance in this. That's why there has to be government money. You know, to make those buildings work, you probably need rents more like $1.95 a foot, and they're in the $1.80s when they stabilize. So there's some kind of a gap just fundamentally in the math. I mean, they've got a parking deck, they've got empty retail space, they've got a very lovely building. So it's proved a market, and it's proved, and it's provided, I think, I'm almost certain the other project wouldn't have been built had that not happened. So if you count that in the equation, that's a benefit. So there's lots of benefits, but as a pure real estate transaction, it's not making money exactly, but it's done a lot of good, I think, for that environment and for the train station area in general.
I just wanted to add on the Orland Park project. We'd heard two things. One, it was launched, I forget what year, like 2009, 2010, like at the bottom of the recession. And Orland Park wanted it to go then, so that's why they did their kind of municipally backed bonds. They wanted it to, they didn't want to wait, number one. And number two, they wanted a more premium apartment building than the private sector would build to establish the kind of brand of the place. So that's what we've heard, why they did it, so a little more information.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I have a question regarding your analysis on the theaters. Marcus Cinema in Orland Park is freestanding. There's one restaurant over there. AMC, which was connected to a shopping complex, has now failed. Is now closed. But yet, when Orland Park opened up, they had two Orland Park theaters on the outer part of the drive. Both of them failed. I don't understand where you got this information saying that in order for a theater to survive, it has to be with a shopping center or shopping complex. Because according to what happened in Orland and Country Club Hills, it's wrong.
Well, I mean, that is the case for Regal's parameters. I guess that's what I can tell you. I can't tell you every time, every place, everything that is true. But this is Regal's information. It's one operator says that's what they need. There may be another operator that needs it and doesn't need that. It doesn't seem likely to me, but I accept your facts. I'm not arguing your facts. I do think the taxes are also a huge problem. And so you combine the lack of a broader commercial environment and the taxes, and it's going to be really challenging, I think. If we could figure out a way to get one at Brookside Marketplace, that would fit more normally into the pattern. But I'm not saying it couldn't work. Anything is possible.
Okay, I have a whole list here.
Okay.
What is the potential time frame for site development, start, and completion?
The potential time frame for site development, I think the most important fact in that equation is when does the state of Illinois stop owning the property? And we don't know that. So as long as it's in their hands, the answer is we don't know, because they're not going to, as far as I can tell, do anything to get the site going. So once that comes unglued, you've got to deal with the site issues, and that's going to take time. And that could be, I can't guess, I'm not an engineer, but I would guess it's not a quick project to deal with the environmental and the demolition and all that stuff. So there's going to be some time when it's out of the hands of the state that it's being pre-developed and cleaned up and prepped before things start coming out of the ground. Several years, I would guess.
Second question. If attractive tax abatements, tax relief cannot be offered for retail and offices, what would this do to the current plan?
I guess the first point is there isn't a plan yet, so, but, you know, we're just sort of at the program level. What are the products that we're going to put into the plan? It's a very fair question. You know, if you can't get the economics to work, you've got to figure out the uses that will work. I mean, that's part of the project. The village can do everything they can to make those projects work. I presume that they're doing that every day, economic development-wise. I don't really know that per se, but if they can't make the economics work, they don't get built. And so we have to have a plan that's flexible to hope for it, but acknowledge that that's not a 100% shot, and we may have to have two versions: the optimistic plan where we get it done, and the less one where we can't figure out how to get office to work.
That was my question. I guess to go on to that, and most businesses have very plan review. So I can't believe that there's not a B plan somewhere that says if we can't offer tax abatements and tax relief, then either it goes dead or this is what we're going to offer.
Right, we'll use the land differently. That's right. I think that's exactly right. I think, again, we don't have a plan.
I mean, what is plan B if we can't get the tax abatements and the favorable tax credits to bring in retail and offices? What's plan B? What's the next step?
Well, there are land uses that work without that, so we just have to change the mix, I think. And we've got, like you said, an optimistic scenario where a lot of that stuff gets fixed and we're predominantly.
So Jeff, you know, presented that there's demand for 40 or 80,000 square feet of retail with the current tax structure. So maybe that's plan B. Plan A is somehow you fix the taxes and you get more of it. Or I don't know, A or B, I'm not sure which is which. They haven't been drawn yet. Krishna.
Okay, next question. How about an indoor water park?
We didn't look at that specifically. I know a few very small things about them. They can tolerate being in a less good location from my other work elsewhere. They don't have to, because they prefer, you're going to get there. If you're going to the water park with the kids, if it's down a road and around a turn, especially with your phones today. So a general Jeff's opinion, not really researched, you wouldn't want to use a corner like this for a thing that can be in the back 40 somewhere, because it can tolerate a suboptimal location. This is a pretty good location right off the freeway. Bingo. But could it work? I don't know.
Okay. Next question. Isn't 191st and Harlem a better site for a sportsplex?
What is it, 191st and Harlem? Let me think about that. Is it south of the marketplace? On the east side of the road or the west? That's the little vacant stuff south of Brookfield Marketplace? Is that? Oh, that's it. Okay. And what was the use? I'm sorry, Karishma?
For the sportsplex.
Oh, I don't know how big that site is. I guess I can't. Does anybody know it off the top of their head?
It's really big.
Is it? Okay. I mean, that's a maybe then. If it's 100 acres plus, you know, that might be a fine solution, you know.
Okay, next question. Is there any thought for ranch-style townhouses?
I guess that's a design question. I don't particularly have an opinion about that. I guess if we haven't gotten that. That's not my department yet. We're kind of working on townhouses at work. What they look like is for the community and Doug and everybody else to figure out, I think, at some level.
Okay.
Just on that one, whoever wrote it, if you can come up afterwards and tell us what you're talking about. Because ranch I think of this way and townhouse I think of that way. Yeah. Okay, come find us, yeah.
If I'm talking for maybe consideration for seniors,
Sure.
you know?
Yeah.
Because if you plan to stay here well into your 70s or 80s, stairs can be a big obstacle.
Sure.
Okay, next question. So what sports complex facilities did you use for the market study? How are any of the other options going to produce for the rest of the village? Will it take away from downtown? So I guess that's 3 questions.
Couple of questions, sure. Caitlin, have you got the list handy of the sportsplexes?
Do you want to
The ones I
answer
can
the
go-
how will it take away from downtown?
I mean, again, so what is the effect of this development on the downtown? That's a tension that we've got to work through in the master plan process, in my mind. You know, certainly the downtown is an important place, and we've got to make sure that what we do is complementary. We haven't sorted that out. That doesn't, I don't think, really get figured out until we start putting pen to paper and putting boxes on the ground.
In terms of the sportsplex, we looked at about 12 different ones in the region. We looked at the ones that were as close to us as possible, so we focused on Orland Park, Schaumburg, Naperville. We looked at regional best in practice, so Rockford. We looked over in Indiana at Crown Point. and then a few other smaller facilities throughout the region.
And then the last question on this was, how are any of the other options going to produce for the rest of the village?
So I guess that means taxes? Is that what people are talking about? I mean, aside from the sportsplex, I guess this goes back to the point that was made earlier. You know, the sportsplex is not a taxpayer. It does, as I said, drive hotel room spending and restaurant spending. So there's indirect economic benefits to the village of a sportsplex. If the price points are high enough, the housing will be a fiscal benefit to the village. If they are higher than the average price in the school district, they will be, the school district will be better off with those things. So we're not doing that sort of specific analysis. Ideally, from a tax-based perspective, it would be all retail. There's no question of that. That's what would be best for the village from a fiscal perspective. But we don't believe that's going to work, and so we have to work with what we think will work. I guess that's where we are.
Next.
Oh, what was your question? I'm sorry.
My question is, I love the presentation, but I don't see anything market-driven. I don't see anything to set Tinley on the map, to move us forward, reduce taxes, but to grow Tinley. I have not seen anything. Houses, we can have houses. What are we going to do to make Tinley on the map, make us good? Whether part of it's a sport complex, which I think would be great for the kids, but I see not one thing that's market-driven.
I think largely, at least my view, and Doug can disagree, the design is what's going to be the magic sauce here. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but the way the environment lays out, the amenities that are produced there are going to be a big part of what makes this a special place and raises that value and raises that profile and all that. But Doug, go ahead.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, why Jeff's here and why he did this is the things he showed tonight are market-driven. They're, meaning the private sector would like to do them here. So that is my definition of market-driven. That is market-driven, as opposed to the government is coming in and writing a check. That's not what he talked about. So everything he talked about is market-driven, number one. Number two, our job, and this is why we're here tonight and why we'll come back with 3 schemes and 2 schemes and 1 scheme, is the special sauce that we can deliver. We're constrained by what the market wants to do. We can't make that more, right? It is what it is. We can add value by designing it well, having the right things in the right configurations, and that is something that doesn't exist anywhere in the south suburbs. I would argue anywhere in Chicago. And we showed in the first meeting, like, was that December or January? I can't remember. Some of the master plan communities around the country that do this, and they are all the best in region places. They get the highest prices, they bring a buzz, people want to live there for the quality of life, the beauty of the place, things like that. So that's what we can do. It may not satisfy you.
No, it doesn't, because you're talking short term, we're talking long term for kids, grandkids, not people.
Ma'am, I deal only in 25-year bites, so I'm not a short-term person. And maybe, have you been to the prior meetings? Because we've talked about this a lot. So we can talk after. I'm a long-term thinker, trust me. So, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's say in the scenario there isn't a whole lot of retail development, it would be more residential development. Say it's mixed use. Is there enough schools in the area to support this, or would you have to build a school, like a grade school type of thing?
We met with this grade school district, and I apologize, I don't know the answer. I don't recall their answer, to be honest. It's been a while since we had that
haven't
conversation.
talked to them in a long time. I will just say I do know that from the master planned communities around the country that are successful, having a great elementary school sells houses like nobody's business. And so if they're walk-to schools, the prices on the houses go crazy. If there's a park nearby and the school, boom, boom, boom. If there's a restaurant and a park and a school, boom, boom, boom. If there's a dog walk, a restaurant, a park, and a school, boom, 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 boom. I got some services and amenities, walking distance. How many booms is that? Whatever. Just, you get what I'm saying. So you lay it out in the right way, and people, a lot of people don't think this way, but let me just say this. This is sort of Jeff's world, but I'll comment on it. A lot of people think that houses are sold by the square footage, the number of granite countertops, 2.5 or 3 bathrooms, whatever the numbers are. And if you do that, you're selling a commodity, right? It's toilet paper, it's Kleenex, they're interchangeable. What you want is a special market differentiator, which is you're not just selling the house, you're selling the lifestyle. People would rather live in the worst house in a great neighborhood than the best house in a bad neighborhood. So we're going to make a great neighborhood, and when we do, the premiums happen. So, and you don't have to compete so much on how many granite countertops you have, because who cares, right? So that's not a quality of life, that's a
Two questions
what
over
a
here.
builder gave you.
One of the things I want to ask is, we have two separate really important projects in the town. One is the house center, the redevelopment. The other one is a stranded progress on our downtown. And the two things we propose, single family and then retail. Just a quick analysis, we have somewhere around 60 vacant businesses in Oak Park Avenue in the center of our town. 60. And in addition to that, we have, when we look at the comparison point of Tinley Park, Frankfurt, and Orland Park, we have more foreclosed and vacant inventory in our single-family housing market than those two comparison points. And so, I guess the question I have is this being viewed, and this is what you've been asked to do, so I'm not just asking this in the context of understanding.
Sure.
Is this project simply being viewed only in the context of the house center, or what's the best thing for our entire town, given that we've got a stranded downtown right now that isn't?
I'll take the first stab at this, and Jeff can weigh in. So we've given a lot of thought to how this project relates or competes or doesn't with the downtown. So as Jeff said, there will be no ground broken here for some number of years. I don't know what it is. As Jeff said, it's the governor or the legislature and other things. Cleanup have to happen. So it's our hope and our advice to the village to get the downtown done, ASAP, yesterday, before this, comes on market. So this is years down the road, number one. Number two, it's really different. When you start from scratch, as much as I'd like to say that design can recreate history, it can't. Your downtown is a unique asset. It's got charms, it's got history, it's got multi-generations of people doing business and living there and working there that we can't compete with. We don't have that. We can't build that from scratch. And so there are always different things. And I don't know, our project didn't include say surveying or assessing the vacancies either in residences or in commercial properties. I will just say, as my opinion as a planner, there are some land uses and building types that are obsolete or approaching obsolescence, meaning the market doesn't want that anymore. I don't know that to be true here, but styles change. There was a period of time when suburbs were built, around the car. The young woman that was here at the last meeting, if you were here, who said, I'm here because of my mom, I got to keep an eye on her, but I want to walk places. That's what 20 and 30 somethings want. And so I don't know, but we have that market in mind. And so it could be that, I don't have an answer for the vacancies, but in terms of what's best for the village, I think having a project here that is positioned to serve the next decade and the next generation, the kids that aren't yet in the room, the kids that are in the schools and so on, where they want to come to Tinley Park, that is the best thing for Tinley Park. Make sense? Yeah. Sure.
We need something that makes, and I think I thought of the moment that occurs to face the reality that we don't have that identity. We don't have something that we're known for, and that's why we're not attracting corporate business. There are towns that are defining themselves and creating the contest for who actually wants to be part of that town. And because we're not doing that, and quite honestly, I don't think this how center should be a 10-year project. I think we should be thinking more ambitiously. I mean, further Roosevelt, another Canwalk Canal, and a lot less time than we're describing here.
Grant.
I have a couple. The first one, would senior or assisted living potentially justify medical facility? I guess on the site potentially.
Yeah, we didn't look at the, aside from knowing where the Advocate Building is, I don't know where medical facilities are in the village, so I can't speak to that. I just don't know, I guess that's the short of it.
There would be a use for that long-term and
Oh, yeah.
kind of recycled as generations were older. And to justify possibly a medical building, office building, and a higher tax because of clientele would be right next to them. And drug pharmacy. And I can kind of see areas being on. But then you have the ball field where the seniors could go stroll down with the guys and have something else to do. And younger generations stop at the creamery type of place.
Yeah, I think conceptually we're 100% on board. We love multi-generational neighborhoods, so if it works, it's great, and it would be supportive for sure. We just didn't look at exactly where the medical facilities are.
And I know it's been for us, and I know it's been expanded over the years.
Yeah.
So the need for that, I'm sure.
So just a couple things to say that you aren't necessarily questions you pose but are worth clarifying. I think any master plan here will have some sports fields. It's going to have a number of either soccer fields or ball fields, whatever. There's a jump from that to the kind of facility the gentleman in the back is talking about in Indiana, a couple hundred acres, right? So it's always going to have sports facilities and serve the youth, number one. Number two, I think there's, without Jeff having studied it and just based on working around the country, there's absolutely demand for a nice senior building or buildings here of different, the gentleman said, what did you say, ranch townhouse, right? Or whether it's a multi-story building with an elevator so everybody can get up and down without the stairs. I feel that there's demand for it. When we surveyed, though, on apartments, which is exactly what that would be, there was not support for apartments. So I'm assuming that if that said senior apartment, the vote would go up. Am I right in assuming that? Okay, so it's not.
I wasn't getting that specific.
Yeah.
The idea kind of came to me, but I just think it
Yeah.
be successful, and, if for some reason it wasn't 30 years from now, it would have the ability to be, not need to be knocked down, but be transitioned.
Sure. Great.
Who will pay for a cleared site free of contamination?
I suppose the simple answer is probably not the developer. So I'm not an elected official here, as you all know, and I don't live here, so I can't and won't run for office. But I think that it's easy to reduce this down into don't buy it, no more taxes, and so on. It's actually a pretty complex issue, which is you all may be accustomed to what the mental health center looks like. It's a dangerous eyesore that anchors your town. It's a lot of people's first impression coming into Tinley Park. Those of you who said we need to be known for something, we need to have an identity. I'll tell you, replacing the vacant, kind of scary mental health center would be a good investment. Is it, right? So that thought, in my reading of the public here, coexists with a competing thought, which is don't spend a dollar. Right? We want things that we don't want to pay for. Give me a car, give me a house. I want to win $1 million. We all naturally want things that we don't have to pay for. So I'll just say in the kind of, as we listen to people's opinions and do so with a lot of earnestness and respect, that's the conflict as I see it. Somebody's got to pay for it. If you were buying it, would you want to take the risk of absorbing mistakes that people made over the last 50 years spilling stuff in the ground? No, you wouldn't, right? You would buy a house and say, no, you clean that up and then I'll buy your house, right? Developers are no different. So we can have the conversation. We don't want to pay for it, but if we want it to be if we want the eyesore to go away, somebody's got to pay for it. There you go. It's not an answer, but it's the true complex. Well, that is, I'll spend a minute on this, and not my expertise. I've never once talked to the state of Illinois about this, other than like vehicle registration. That's what I talked to the state of Illinois about. But the conversation has been, they wanted, what did they want? They wanted they wanted to be paid $4 million, and then the village undertook quite responsibly a study to ask how much does cleanup cost, and it was 11 or 12 million, something like that was the estimate. And there was discussion, oh goodness, could it be more, could it be less? It could be more, it could be less. We don't know the 12 million exactly. But anyway, you read the papers. The state is not writing checks for any of this. They're not writing checks for anything, least of all this. So it's in the center of your town. It's an eyesore dragging the town down, in my opinion, because of its uncertainty, because it's unsafe. It presents the worst possible front door. And so to say, yeah, it's a big problem, but I don't want to pay to fix it, and no one else will, it's one of those things, what's the choice? So somebody's got to pay for it. Somebody's got to pay for it.
I mean, the mechanics, if I may briefly, there is a TIF district here, and while that is tax dollars, it would not necessarily result in increased property taxes to the taxpayers. There's a mechanism to collect revenues from the development of the site to pay to improve the site. So, we can get into the details of how the money gets generated, if you like, but it presumably would not be a tax hike, I guess. That's certainly,
Right.
I can almost certainly say the board would not be jumping at that opportunity. So we would look at every other option before we got to that idea.
So in your planning,
Uh-huh.
will you be able to give us what the TIF would be to help us
Yes, ma'am.
residents, so we have a clear understanding of what it's going to cost us as residents?
Yes, that is, once we get the plan laid out, we can run that math, the very math you're asking for, and we'll have that answer to talk about how much money will we have to do the stuff we got to do to make it work.
Yeah, and just to say this, if you know how a TIF works, and Jeff actually can explain it to you, I can't, but he has a slide if we wanted to spend a minute doing that. But one of the things that's on my mind, we've talked a lot about when you go to sell a house. Let me tell this little story. So imagine somebody tried to sell you a car and the steering wheel was extra. You get the car, but you don't get the steering wheel. It's like, okay, that's kind of cool, but I got to charge extra. So it's like, to me, that's like trying to sell a house without the amenities around it. If the park is there on the day I go to buy a new house here, I'm going to pay more for the house. Who's the beneficiary of the higher price on the house? The TIF and the taxpayers of Orland Park. And so if there's an investment, whoever pays for it, but if some of those amenities are in place when the houses start going for sale, they will sell for more, the TIF will generate more revenue, it will further ensure that it's not coming out of the pockets of taxpayers. So there's a process by which you need to put enough amenities there when you start selling houses to get the higher prices. You can't build them all, but you have to build some. If you build none, I was going to say something my mom would scold me for. So that would be silly, I will say. That would be silly, and that would be leaving a lot of money on the table. So, to make money, you have to spend some money. So somebody's got to spend that money, and that if they got a clean site, the developer might actually be willing to do some of that. So for your consideration.
Doug,
More amenities earlier is better for taxpayers.
Doug, I have a few questions.
Please.
If Tinley Park does not own the property, why are we planning?
Why are we playing?
Planning.
Oh, planning, okay. The village, the trustees and the mayor, I think, have spoken eloquently, all of them, to say that control is what everyone agrees on. As you know, there's a split on council. Some people are for stuff and against stuff. The common element that got us here and doing this plan is the need to control. So if the village chooses never to buy the land, what we will have in place is a master plan and some sort of zoning or regulations that govern it. So let's just say the governor has a friend, sells it to him for an industrial dump. And we say, well, wait, Tinley has a plan and has zoning, and you can't get a permit on that. That's a version of blocking a bad thing. So that's part of what the plan will do. And if the governor has a friend, he sells it to him, and they happen to want to build what our plan calls for, we won the lottery. That's really good, right? So anyway, that's why we're doing the plan, is to make sure that bad things don't happen, and hopefully good things do happen.
Would Hollywood Casino be interested in building a casino on the site?
I don't know the answer to that question. I know that getting a casino license is extraordinarily hard to do and not a thing that I understand. So I would not hold my breath on that one, I guess, unless someone here knows somebody at the state who can get you a gambling license.
Okay, next question. Any thought about a major museum, i.e. Lucas?
Again, I think if you've got a friend with $50 million that wants to endow a museum here, I think we'd love it. It'd be a great amenity to the site. It'd be wonderful. You know, you've got Doug's number. Give him a call. You know, I don't think anybody's against a cool museum. We could figure out a way to design it. It'd be awesome. But that is not a market-driven thing. That is a private donation-driven thing, generally speaking.
Okay.
There's one in the downtown Normal, right? And one project you worked on. It's a great anchor. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. What about peripheral costs to the village? How high can we build without new village equipment?
Fire equipment, yeah. I don't know what your fire environment equipment is. We're talking about 3, 4, 5 stories, maybe 6. I don't know. Do you have a ladder that goes that high?
Orland is 4.
Okay.
They have 2 buildings that are 5 or more. Before they have to replace their equipment. If I worked on a building,
Okay.
they wouldn't let anybody on, I would build floor. For that very reason.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess to get into the minutia of TIF, if there is a building, hypothetically, that triggers the need for a special machine to serve the fire needs.
Very expensive equipment.
Sure, but the TIF can help pay for it if we really got to do it, I guess. No, it's real money. It's tax dollars. It's a question, and it's a fair question. If that is really a trigger point, and we say we don't want to spend the $500,000, I don't know what they cost, I apologize, because that's the hurdle we can't take. Maybe we hold the ceiling of the building down. That doesn't necessarily jump to mind that we should do that, but
Well, yeah, that's a great question, and we will. We have a steering committee, and we will ask that the fire department be there at a future meeting. I was going to just put in context. You know, if this were one of the master plan communities from around the country that we showed in the first meeting back in whenever that was, November, December, at 280 acres, this is a multi-hundreds of millions of dollars project. Might be 3, 4. I don't know what, he's the smarter guy at math, but $300 or $400 or $500 million project. And so if what we're talking about is again, I don't know the cost, $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 fire truck that makes a $500 million project go forward, these are considerations that we can put in context, right? Who wants to spend $500,000 for a fire truck, but if it gets you all these benefits, again, to make money, you have to invest. That's all.
Okay, last question in my list, sorry.
Yeah.
I know we need a plan, but when will the first shovel really be turned after giving the land and cleaning? 4 to 5 years?
Let's say 3 to 5 years. How's that? No one knows, but there seems to be a lot of interest in having a specific answer. Grant, okay, this will be the stack, and then we got an exercise, and we got a hockey game. Grant, what you got?
I'm going to ask this in 2 parts. Has there been any research on the likelihood of low-income housing, and how would that affect the success of the project?
we did not study the need for affordable housing. That was not in the types of products we were asked to look at. So I don't know whether it would be feasible or not, and nobody asked me to have an opinion about that, I guess.
So I'll take on that question because I think it's got a lot of opinions weighing on it. So number one, people in communities we work with oppose something called low-income housing. What a lot of people don't realize is that senior citizens are oftentimes the most qualified people for low-income housing. They're on fixed income. This was my dad, and the income isn't going up. He can't take a job. So when we talk about low-income housing, it matters a lot who we're talking about. That is the truth. And so does everyone agree with that? If it's your fixed income grandmother and she's living in low-income housing, we're probably for it. If it's somebody else, the others, whatever, there's an instinct against it. Did I get that right? Okay. So, no? So people would exclude the fixed income grandmother? Is that what I heard? Who is that? Show the hands.
No, I don't agree with you, but I think the question has more to do with the whole Buckeye situation.
Okay.
I would just say that would actually, I mean, it's a great question. I don't think it has to do with a constituent themselves at all. I just think retailers would actually, as a retailer and site selection person for a lot of retailers, I would want to know what the disposable income is in the area, and that would kind of what types of businesses are located there. So I think it's a great question. I think
Yeah.
we're only defining what types of businesses are located.
Yeah. Well, so a couple things. From around the country, there are all sorts of ordinances, mostly in cities, that actually require affordable housing of one sort or another, and they tend to cap out at about 15 or 20% of the market. So, which is to say, if you have 80 units of market rate and 20 units of affordable, that seems to be, that's acceptable in other places, which isn't to say that it's acceptable here. The gentleman who spoke, I don't know your business. Jeff deals with realtors in a certain way, we deal with them in a certain other way. Purchasing power is purchasing power. So if you have a captive building of 100 low-income seniors, they still buy groceries. If I'm in the grocery business, I'm glad to see them, right? Regardless of their income, they eat. Anyway, but it would be a bad master plan, let me say this, if it was too reliant on low-income housing. That would be a bad master plan, but in moderation, like salt in my diet. A little bit, it's okay, but my doctor says not too much. So.
Doug, this is a good maybe Q&A wrap-up if we're finishing. So.
Yeah.
I know you guys have done other projects like this before. My question is like a matter of process. What is the vibe like, comparatively speaking, in the meetings that you've had here in Tinley Park, comparable to meetings in other communities where you've done a master plan? You know, it's kind of hard to look into this future that's very nebulous. There's a lot of question marks, and there's some anxiety here in this community surrounding some other issues that don't necessarily relate directly to this, but have an effect on it. And so I'm just wondering if you could speak to what is the general feel, vibe you have for our community versus others that you've worked with before.
I'll start by saying unconditional love. I'm sincere about that because, Tinley's in the news, right? So even when we aren't at meetings, we hear about the meetings you're having without us. You're not inviting us, but that's okay. We're glad not to be at all of them. They're open public meetings, right? So. But I would say, no, I think that this is a community that is in transition in terms of its leadership. It's had a certain way of doing things for 25 or 30 years. It's gotten some benefits from doing that. I mean, there's a convention center, there's the, what do you call the music thing, whatever it's called, and many things. If Tinley is known for anything, it is probably those two things. Those are probably the regional assets. When I turn on the radio in the morning, Tinley Park comes up because of music, right? So that's what it's known for on the north side. So there were, benefits to that, but there's a certain closed way of doing things. And so we are with the new generation, which is open it up, talk about things, let people say things, say popular things and unpopular things. So that's just how we work. And so we've watched, even in the last few months, to me it feels like a tone change from the first meeting. People were just pent up and angry and just like mad, for stuff back when, before we weren't even there. So, people saw, we were respectful and listened and let people have their say. And so I felt like the temperature's gone down like 15 degrees since that first meeting. So that's success. That's one thing. And the second thing, there is a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of competing ideas of what progress is. The young woman over here who said, that's not market-driven development. I beg to differ. It actually is. There's something that wants to be here. What we're trying to do is to bring to this site the best in region development, the best thing in metropolitan Chicago. That would be my thing, which doesn't mean it's the highest price. It may be the best quality of life. Everything's laid out just so. Your kids are off to school. I'm walking to work. We're going to the restaurant Friday night. All this kind of stuff, like the dream, right? Your happy family in a neighborhood. And a neighborhood you can age in place. I don't have to leave just because I can't do stairs anymore. There's a place for me. I don't have to lose my friends and move 5 miles away where the senior building is because that community wasn't restrictive of multifamily housing. I can stay there. So that's the quality that I think I know how to deliver. That's what we know how to do. And that would advance, I think, Tinley's future. So thanks for your question. I'll get off my speech box and say thank you. We have an exercise, if people can stick with us for a little bit, I was going to say the ball game. The hockey game starts in 35 minutes. So can we do this? Allie? Krishma? Yeah, what do you got? One more? What do you have?
Regarding the cleanup, who is responsible if problems are found later with lead or other chemicals in the soil or water?
Yeah, that was a question that came up at the last meeting. I mean, that's an important issue to deal with in the process. You know, the village doesn't want to own a mess any more than a developer does, and so I think that's part of the due diligence. But currently, the obligation lies with the state to deal with that, and I think that the steps into ownership from here to hypothetical village ownership, if they want to do that, have got to be taken very carefully. So currently, it's the state's problem, and we'll have to walk through that with our eyes wide open and the best information we can get.
Are we done with questions? Thank you all. That was great.